Hey there, it's another video and it's about Stimulus.js. And if you've heard of this, chances are you've probably seen it pushed around in the Rails community. It's more or less nothing to do with Rails, but it fits nicely with Ruby on Rails. So the reason it's probably more so in the community is that it's built by the folks at Basecamp. And they built it basically as a way to bring JavaScript into your app, but not take over your app like React or Vue.js might do. Those kinds of tools are great, but they require so much, setup, configuration. You need some sort of API and some crazy authentication to work with. And what Basecamp kind of practices is like the monolith, megalith app style of work. So your one big app will, be the source of truth. There won't be like an API and then a front end and then all your other services, microservices running. And then you'll have all these things spinning at once, hoping all of them just always stay up and nothing's ever wrong, but it's actually just a kind of a nightmare to maintain. So that's where Stimulus.js comes in. It's a way to introduce JavaScript into your app in a more framework conventional pattern, kind of like Rails is. So it's kind of opinionated in a sense in terms of how you implement certain practices and patterns and stuff inside an app, maybe where things live, etc. So at its core, Stimulus is a modern JavaScript take. So we use import statements and stuff like that. So that's stuff like ES6 and whatnot. And that's kind of the idea behind it. It's still modern, but it's kind of going back to the almost jQuery feel in a sense, where you grab something from the DOM, manipulate it, and then kind of control things from there. So I want to at least walk you through getting it installed and kind of doing like a very MVP of what it does and what it can do. And in future videos, I'll probably do more in the sense of using this in other builds or Let's builds that we do. The core of it is controllers, actions, and targets. So there's some stuff to kind of know. It got a little bit of a learning curve, but it's not too bad. If you've come from Rails, use Rails already, the same kind of concept of controllers aligns with this framework. So think of it as like the namespace for something. Within that context of a controller, you're going to have actions that do things. And on those actions, you can create events. Or in other words, in JavaScript, there's all these types of events you can fire. And that's what an action would do. And a target is a way you could essentially target an element. So commonly you'd put like a document.query selector and then an ID, pass an ID. You don't need to do that with this framework. It's kind of nice. You just append a data target to an element and then you can, append it from there. So the way that it works is you need some sort of surrounding controller data controller element there. And for this quick reference here, they're going to do search. So the controller is called search. You'd have search_controller.js is the naming convention to follow. And within that, you'll have these targets. And within each, you could say define those targets within the JavaScript class. So those all get piped through. If you add a search.whatever, it's going to go ahead and register it as a target, assuming you have data target attribute on the element. And what you do from there is go into the class itself, search controller. You'd import the controller from Stimulus, so you have that to use, and you'd extend it. And within each, you'll have these statics declaration that are all the targets you need, and it's just an array of those targets. What's interesting is you can control, say there's one or more targets, the naming conventions to target them in your JavaScript is a little bit dynamic. So this, in this case, would refer to the class, JavaScript class, so this one here. And inside that, you just pass the name of the thing. So in our case, query target is the next name, so it's capitalized. And that's for a singular pattern. If you have multiple queries in your targets, in your HTML, you can go and find all those by just making this plural. And they can just check if it exists by this dot has that name target. So this has query target. So all those things are already taken care of for you. You don't need to define a ton of variables or anything in the controllers, and I find that very clean and nice. The only, I would say, kind of critique I would give it is your HTML does get a lot of data attributes when you do something like this, but if you're not depending on the framework as like a full app solution, then you should be fine. You know, this is for sprinkles of JavaScript in your app, so you can enhance things like forms or hiding and showing things, toggling appearance, etc. So it gets a little deeper, but that's essentially it. Besides actions, which I just talked about, they boil down to this kind of pattern. We're going to define a gallery controller. So assuming you have a gallery_controller.js file somewhere. And within that, you'll have a click event. So right here is where you define what kind of event you want to pass. And that could be click, it could be focus, it could be blur, it could be scroll, anything. And it's pretty neat. And then you have an arrow signifier, which is going to go to your controller, in this case, gallery. And then in that controller, there's going to be a method that you create. You can name it whatever you want. And in this case, they use next. So that's going to trigger some event when you click on this button, fires this code in that controller. So this is all just reviewing the docs right now. I'm going to try to walk you through something like this. We'll just maybe make a toggle controller just to toggle appearance. Just to show you by example, but it goes deeper. You can do window and document events or resizing, tons of stuff. Pretty much any event you could think of, you can target. There are naming conventions to uphold to. I would just read the docs. The documentation is pretty brief, pretty short, because it only needs to be. There are a few lifecycle callbacks, kind of like you'd see on Vue or React. There's a connect, so anytime the DOM is registered in that controller, you could do something as soon as it's set up in the DOM. So maybe you'd like, I don't know, update some JSON data from the server and update some text in the screen, etc. You could do the disconnect too to tear down things. I set up a basic app behind the scenes. I use my own template just to save some time. So I just made a stimulus demo Rails vanilla app, like I said, using my template, kickoff Tailwind template. Probably link to that. And within that, we need to add stimulus to the stack. We don't currently have it in this app. So let me do that. You can go to Webpacker, which is what runs basically the JavaScript in a new given Rails app. They have ports of different things you can add. So in this case, I'm going to add stimulus just by running this command. So bundle exec Rails Webpacker :install stimulus. And then that goes, basically does some yarn installation, creates a few JavaScript files, and sets up stimulus just to basically be ready to use, which is why I'm doing it in the Rails app to begin with. You could use this outside of a Rails app just as well. You don't need to use it in Rails, but it does play nice with turbolinks if you use turbolinks, which is something that's pretty well native to Rails. So let's open this in our code editor. We can give a look of what just basically installed. Inside the JavaScript folder is where you're going to find the most magic. The controllers folder is just added, so that's just kind of what stimulus is referred to. All your JavaScript files are going to be called controllers, and within each you'll have some sort of naming convention _controller. So whatever you want to call it, say it's toggle, say it's, I don't know, something. Try to think of these as repeatable though. I would recommend that. If you can keep them in such a way that just do maybe single things or are reusable in such a way that you don't need to create a new controller for everything you do, that's a good pattern to uphold. But basically, to install it, this is the Webpack version of it. And it's basically set up with Webpack because Rails already comes that way right now. I'm using Rails 6.03, I think, at the time of this. And we import the application class from stimulus, Webpack helpers. So assuming you're using Webpack, you're probably going to need that. We're going to initialize the application itself, and then just kind of go and load everything inside this folder into this application. So Traditionally, if you want to add other controllers, you'd have to application.load that file. And in this case, we're just going to go ahead and include them by default. So if that's kind of fuzzy on the outside, that's kind of what it's doing using regex and stuff. So basically, it means you don't have to do anything to get started, which is great. Inside a hello controller, it looks like this. This is the basic skeleton of a controller. The HTML, we're still going to need to actually change our HTML. You're not generating any of that with this JavaScript like React or something would normally. So instead, we're going to actually append some elements and manipulate them like you normally would with JavaScript in the DOM. But in this case, we'll use data attributes to target those directly. So I'm going to rename this to maybe just a toggle controller so we can toggle appearance. And the great thing is just renaming it means it's already set up in the DOM for use. You don't need to rename a class or anything in here. You will need to append like the targets. So in this case, I'm going to say toggleable. So something that can be toggled will be a target we use. I'm going to go into my views, index layout, and we'll just create like some dummy content here. So let's say, and then within here, we're going to have the content we're going to toggle. Nothing great to look at by any means, but this is more of just proving that we can use this. So right now, there's no way our stimulus installation knows what's going on. We need to basically add some of those data attributes to tell it, oh, this is mounted now. I can go and, do something about it. So I might just do like a text array 600, 700, I don't know. Something like that. Okay. If you recall from the documentation, there was this concept of a controller being this data controller element. This needs to wrap all the things you're doing within the controller itself inside of Stimulus. So what you would do in this case, since we named this toggle controller, it's a data controller toggle. So those names matter. Now, in the instance of this button, we need to go and add data target. In this case, will be toggle. You need a preface with the controller, and then do a dot toggleable, which is what I called the target here. So if we just go connect. This is one of those lifecycle methods. Just when it basically fires up, we just see console.log connected. I'll go and I'm actually going to remove these comments. So this should fire that console log event without doing anything. Like there's no click event, there's nothing. It's just going to go ahead and do its thing. So first we need to boot up the app so it compiles. There we go. And I'll go to localhost 3000. Okay, so right now, nothing like this should be hidden technically. What we're going to do is hide it. But if we console.log, that connected text comes back. So that's perfect. And if you want to know a little bit more about, what's going on or what this class is, you can just pretty much say this. And it'll come back as like a bunch of stuff relative to that class as well as stimulus. So it comes back with the object, with context, all these observers, and modules, and scopes, and craziness. If you just say this dot element, it'll target the actual controller div that we added the data controller attribute to. I believe. There it is. See? So the whole thing, which is neat. See, sometimes you need to add like classes to that thing. You can add these anywhere. It could be within the body itself or just within a scope of a block on your page. It's kind of endless in that regard. To speed up my workflow, though, I'm going to open up a new tab. It's going to be in the same app directory. I'm going to run Webpack dev server. And this should do hot module reloading with Webpack, which is fantastic to do. So if you run this alongside your other Rails console, you should be all set. Anytime you change anything in a JavaScript file or anything in this folder, pretty much it'll go ahead and save and reload, I should say. So, okay, what we want to do is hide this secondary content. I'm going to add a class of hidden, which is brought to you by Tailwind, since my template here uses that. So that won't reload, but you can refresh all the same. So now if we click this, nothing's going to show because nothing's going on. But if we add data action click event, and we're going to say, okay, what controller do I need to find to initialize this event? And in our case, it will be toggle again. And then here's the quick maybe gotcha of that is it needs to be the hash mark or whatever you want to call that number key of the action within your controller. So typically what those will be are just any method in here. So it could be whatever function you decide to call it. So in our case, I'm going to just say toggle again. And since this is ES6, we can, leave this alone. And if I hit console.log, we could say clicked. And just like that, do toggle again. Since it's the class is toggle, I could probably call this something better, but like toggle is fine. So if we go back in there, watch the console down here, click that, it was clicked. So just like that, we have an event, we can manipulate things and so on and so forth. So perfect. But how do we get this to toggle visibility? So that's where targets come in. We have this target called toggleable available, and we already know what that is. And if we want to verify it, you can say this dot toggleable. But the big catch that I first ran into is forgetting to include target with it. You need to always include target or targets to get that actual element from this class. So when we go ahead and click again, we'll get that element back. So that's great. Okay, so we want to toggle visibility. If I just remove the class of hidden, I can do that, right? Let's do that. So we'll say this.toggleable class list dot toggle hidden. And because it's a button, maybe you want to, prevent the default. Say you're inside a form or something. Submit button inside a form will, or any button inside a form will default to submit the form. That's one thing I ran into before. So you can just as easily pass the event down through this thing. So you could say event.prevent default and save. So at this point, we basically have this concept of toggling text. So just like that, it's pretty sweet. Okay, what if I want the button text to toggle with it? So if I say toggle on will be the default. Or wait, let's do open, toggle open, just to do open close. And then one extra layer of nice, I don't know what the word would be, nicety is called data maps inside of Stimulus. So you can do things on the controller element where you reference the controller name. You prefix it with data reference in this case. It's called reference controller. And then pass in some other arbitrary name that you want. And then you could pass values to that. So what I want to do is toggle the text. So an easy way in my mind to do that is data.toggle.open is toggle open data.toggle, not dot, dash close toggle close. Okay, this won't do anything yet, but what we can do is go ahead and get this data and return it. So what we can do is say this dot toggleable target dot text content equals, well, we need to kind of say, oh, is it hidden or not? So if we could just say if this toggleable, I'm kind of repeating myself with that name. I could encapsulate it with a variable if you want to. I'm just leaving it for now. Dot class list dot contains hidden. We're going to do something, otherwise we're going to do something else. So we'll say the text content, if it contains hidden, is going to be this dot element dot data. What was the doc saying? Or this dot data get. And then we called it in our app open and close. So that's pretty much a quick win there. So if it's already has the hidden class, we want to say open. Else close. I think that's right. I'll double check that real quick. Okay, that's wrong. So, oh, that's right. We need to get another target. We're using the wrong target here. So you could say event.target, but it's probably easier just to add a target to the same action element. So you can do that as well. So we could say data target toggle button. And then we need to pass in that here, so button. And then these become button target. That makes sense? So now that'll toggle just as easy. Open, close, open, close. Pretty cool, right? So it's a little bit of a convention to uphold to. Your HTML gets a little even dirtier, especially if you're using Tailwind. But I find this very productive and quick to quick to use inside of app. You just need that bit of functionality that isn't too strenuous, or just hydrating some API and filling up a page with loaders. I find this just simplifies things. It may not be pretty, it may not be perfect, but it gets the job done. And you can always add more actions and methods to your heart's content, basically, without writing traditional JavaScript unless you really need to. Stimulus does really well with turbo links. I mentioned that. You can also import other stuff into these. So like any other library, say like a tooltip library like tippy.js, you could add to this, just import it, like you would anything else, and utilize it within these methods all the same. So I find it very, very useful. I pretty much use this as my JavaScript framework of choice in a Rails app these days. I don't lean one way or another. I'm totally cool with writing vanilla JavaScript. There are some caveats when you do that in a Rails app with turbo links, though. So going this route means you don't really have to worry about that, which is great. But it also has its limitation in terms of if you want to just be extremely dynamic in certain ways or render things in a certain way. You might have a mix of things going on. So I commonly have like a source file of other JavaScript files that are just vanilla, or other little libraries I need to include. And then, of course, the traditional Webpack stuff, and then the controllers to go along with it. And then if I need even fancier stuff, I'll probably roll something like a Vue component and add that. So JavaScript becomes very heavy on the file side, but I think it's very, extendable in terms of getting the file size down if you need to, or chunking it like Webpack allows you to do. But yeah, hopefully that was useful. If you guys want to see more of this, more Stimulus, understand it a bit more, I can happily walk you through maybe creating a more realistic example than just toggling stuff. Maybe it's like form validation or something like that, or using it with other stuff out there. There's a new library called Stimulus Reflex, which is pretty cool. It's kind of like a real-time server-side rendered library that uses Rails action cable to kind of do some magic where it feels like a React app, but it's not. It's just a Rails app with Ruby and JavaScript, which is cool. So maybe more of that. But yeah, let me know in the comments, and thanks again for watching. All right, peace. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.